The footage shows children waving at the camera. Hundreds of kids were reported missing by their parents between 1993 and 2001. This is where they were found. A 400-acre compound isolated in rural Georgia. No outsider was allowed entrance. The footage shows massive pyramids, a towering sphinx, and strange monuments. Inside, everyone appears happy, waving at the camera. Behind the smiles, these people are hiding a disturbing secret. When local sheriffs investigated the missing children, armed men met them at the gate. What really went on inside the compound remained a secret for decades. Doctors in Georgia started noticing an alarming pattern. Multiple hospitals admitted dozens of children from the compound as young as 11 years old who were pregnant. The FBI quickly got involved, planning a raid on the compound to save the hundreds of children living behind the gates. The FBI was afraid of having a repeat of the attack in Waco, Texas, a cult raid which saw dozens of young children murdered and sparked mass hysteria. The FBI would have no idea what they were up against until one 7-year-old girl escaped the compound before it was too late. She was the only one who could expose the truth. It is 1977 in New York City. 2-year-old Niki is living with her mother in a small apartment in Queens, New York, a neighborhood riddled with crime and violence. There are gangs, drugs everywhere, heavy crime, heavy murder, especially on Bushwick Avenue. Every day as Niki's mom leaves for work, she experiences the brutality of the streets of New York. She thinks about little Niki. This is not the world she wants her to grow up in. With little money, the single mom does not have many options. One day everything changes when Niki's mother is approached by a man in a long white garment. He hands her a book and points at the address printed on the cover. That night, she becomes filled with curiosity and reads the book cover to cover. Finally, feeling that her prayers and hopes for a better life are being answered, she decides that she will visit the man the next day. As she walks down the street, she proceeds with her usual caution. As she approaches 717 Bushwick Avenue, she feels the air around her begin to change. Slowly, she hears the faint sound of a choir singing. As she walks in, she sees children laughing, playing, and running around freely in beautiful garments. She comes face to face with an entire community, a community who preaches about their struggle while lifting each other up. After this first meeting, a new routine starts for the young mother. She begins attending the gatherings regularly, finally finding a place that feels like home. Slowly, the streets of New York feel safer with the help of this new community. As the years go by, Niki's mom starts to change. She finally sees a future for her and her kids, one that is hopeful and full of possibilities. Niki, now 7 years old, starts to become more and more aware of her mother's faith. For the first time since her mom's discovery, she tags along to a sermon with her. Niki's mom watches her daughter as she enters. Seeing her child carefree and surrounded by such peace and joy brings tears to her eyes. Behind this safe community is one man who made it all happen. It's charismatic preacher, Dr. Dwight York. He could walk in a room and get along with everybody. He knew how to bring people together. The community, known as the Nuwaubian Nation, had its roots in New York City back in the 1960s. At the time, the city was an even more dangerous place to live, especially for African Americans, who faced daily discrimination and violence in the years following segregation. Racial tensions were high and the streets of New York were no less forgiving. Muggings, drug deals, and violent crime were a part of everyday life. For many, the new community offered more than just a spiritual and cultural liberation. It was a safe haven for Black residents in New York and across other cities along the East Coast. For people of African descent, history and culture were literally severed by slavery. Here comes York with an answer to them. York was an accomplished speaker who spent decades building this community. He often spoke about fighting for Black Americans and had ties to the Black Panther movement. On the side, he was also a musician, producing his own smooth jazz, funk, and disco records. He was an artist, an activist, and most importantly, the leader of the Nuwaubian Nation. His message of self-empowerment and strength only grew stronger into the 80s. In 1986, Niki's family takes a big leap of faith. At just 11 years old, Niki officially moves into the compound in Bushwick, New York, along with her 2 younger siblings. She is promised a roof over her head, protection, and the assurance of a better, brighter future. It was an exchange from the hard-knock life of being on the streets to moving into a community that was completely secured and protected by their own people. But with their new lives come new rules, new customs, and ultimately, a completely new way of life. Her wardrobe changed, how they ate changed. They would study the Quran, they learned Arabic from Arabic teachers. The spiritual leader is particularly fond of Niki and her siblings, and makes sure they are well fed, properly dressed, and kept entertained. He pays them close attention, greeting them warmly, checking in on their well-being, and ensuring they are included in community activities. For Niki, the attention feels comforting, special. In a way, she has found a new father figure to look up to, someone both protective and powerful. A little after she joined the community, her mom became one of his wives. That meant she was one of his children. She looked up to him. That is my dad. Dr. Malachi Dwight York is the center of the Nuwaubian Nation. He is revered as their leader and their savior. He is the provider of safety and hope. By this point, there are over 1,000 members, and their community center in Bushwick is becoming increasingly crowded. It comes to a point where it is clear to York that they have outgrown the city streets, and a new chapter needs to begin. Dwight York decides to build a new home for his congregation, and it will be over 900 miles away from New York in the rural farmlands of Putnam County, Georgia. They are driving cross-country, seeing the rural areas that they were not accustomed to seeing. They pulled onto the property, and it was just open land. It was amazing. The property was out in Putnam County in a very rural area, a little over 400 acres. Isolation was very much a factor. They were coming to Georgia. They were going to form their own nation, not subject to the laws of the United States. Before York starts building in Georgia, he decides to fully overhaul the Nuwaubian Nation doctrine, drawing from different cultures, religions, and mythologies from around the world to create a new identity for his community. He makes drastic changes to his appearance in his quest. One moment taking on a Western persona, donning cowboy hats and boots. Next, he claims to be an extraterrestrial being called Yanun, and even going as far as calling himself Chief Black Thunderbird Eagle while wearing a feather headdress. He moves from one identity to the next until he lands on the perfect one that will define the new Nuwaubian Nation. York gathers his followers for a sermon. There, he proclaims the true origin of the Nuwaubians, that they are in fact descendants of ancient Egyptians from a different planet. His loyal followers welcome their newfound identity and quickly get to work. They begin building. A massive sphinx head is erected, towering over the previously abandoned farmland. Artists are hired, murals are painted, and before long, dozens of elaborate structures and several large pyramids begin to take shape. With each new structure, the place transforms into something so bizarre and theatrical, drawing more and more attention from their neighbors and passers-by. Dwight and his followers name it Tamari, Egypt of the West. If you were coming into Putnam County on Georgia Highway 142, all of a sudden there are pyramids out there in the middle of a cow pasture. It was very unusual. Though the neighbors are confused by the strange new community, the compound is not disruptive. The ground stays tidy, there is no noise and no trouble. It is strange to look at, yes, but it appears harmless. But the truth is not what it seems, and what is really going on behind these walls is far more disturbing. 2 years after joining the Nuwaubian community, Niki finally feels settled in her new home. But then one day, one of York's wives finds Niki alone on the grounds. She calls her over urgently, leading her to a private room. That is when the woman tells the young teenager something she never expected. One of the wives had a conversation with her and said York would be the person that would teach her about sex, and she would help her and talk to her. Because these are things that you want to know as a growing woman. In a state of shock, Niki does not know what to do or how to feel. She just listens. Maybe this is normal, and every other young girl in the community gets the same talk from Dwight York as part of his teachings. After all, he is the respected leader, the prophet. One of the things that he told them is the person who takes your virginity That is the person that you are always going to be connected to and loyal to. That is when the 45-year-old York comes in and locks the door behind him, leaving him and Niki alone in the room. The young teenager looks at the man she calls her father. Something feels wrong. Suddenly, a strong sense of fear washes over her. In that moment, the trust she once had in him shatters. He was just like, "It is not a big deal. Like, why are you making this a big deal?" It was not something that she wanted to do, and he just kind of held her down and just did it. She was miserable. She used to write him many letters saying that she hated her life, and she wished she was not born. But there is nothing she could do about it. This is someone who, for all of her life, was their leader, their master teacher. So when you have that ingrained in you, you do not want to leave. The world she thought she understood, the people she thought she could rely on, all feels different now. Everything has changed and there is no going back. Niki stays quiet, trapped by the rules and by the eyes constantly surveying her, making sure she stays loyal and does not disrespect the leader by going against his teachings. With no one to turn to, not even her own mother, it feels like there is nowhere else to go. It completely starts out with gaining their trust. Your parent is telling you that this is God and this is our Savior. So they believed they were supposed to do whatever they needed to do to please him. Niki lives in fear, harboring a secret that she tells no one. Everyone in the community acts normally, praising Dwight York, worshiping their leader, not knowing the darkness this man possesses. But as the teenager grows up, something inside her tells her that she is not alone. She started seeing the patterns of certain things. It started to remind her of how miserable she was when things started happening to her. York's power has only grown unchallenged and out of sight. A part of Niki knows she needs to escape to save herself and the other children. But the fear of leaving behind everything she knows, everything she has ever had, is strong. Having been herself a victim of Dwight York is one thing, but seeing the same thing happening to younger children is another. In spite of years of manipulation and grooming, Niki can still see how wrong everything is. Over time, she realizes that she needs to escape, not just for her sake, but for all the other girls who need to be protected. Being in a space that is supposed to be holy and pure and protected and happy, but they are miserable. Times keep getting worse and worse. She was scared to leave because she is not going to be protected. She does not know anything on the outside. But some part of her was like, I am willing to go to the unknown. However, her mother does not see it that way. For her, the community is what saved her and her kids from the dangers of the world. So when Niki gathers up the courage to confess her plan, her mom's reaction takes her by surprise. The side she has chosen is not her daughter's. A campaign of intimidation and pressure begins, led mainly by York, but also by her own mother. Despite the heartache, Niki tries to stay strong. With no family on the outside to help her, she tracks down a former cult member, now living in Atlanta, who offers her a place to stay while she reaches safety. Meanwhile, York is furious to see one of his daughters trying to leave him. The betrayal is huge and his pride is on the line. Niki, by openly rejecting him, has cornered him. That is when York takes an unprecedented decision. In an attempt to save face, Niki is not leaving him. He is the one kicking her out. The day she left, she was scared and numb, and felt like this is it. If she is gonna die, then at least she made that one thing, that choice of her own, because she did not have any choices. She had to do what she was told the whole time. Her mission is clear. Expose the disturbing truth about York's cult and save the children still trapped at the compound before it is too late. But unbeknownst to her, the FBI is already on it. For years, the FBI has been quietly building a case against the cult leader. Ever since they started receiving the most unusual phone calls from across the country. Calls from parents who all had missing children. Authorities would get calls from a mother or a father. My daughter is down there in a cult. I cannot get in touch with her. I do not know what has happened. Can you try to find out for me? But when going there was always an armed guard at the gate. They would not let you on the property. At that time, it was unclear what was going on. Then doctors from the surrounding area started sounding the alarm. They were uncovering a horrific pattern. Girls, as young as 11 years old, were showing up at hospitals pregnant. As they traced their locations, they all came from one place, the Nuwaubian compound. While agents continue their investigation into York, There is growing concern about the potential violence and innocent lives that could be lost if the FBI confronts the community leader directly at the compound. Information had been received over the years that he had a stockpile of weapons. There was concern about a shootout. York becomes increasingly aggressive and reckless, appointing armed guards to guard the gate, while the locals of Putnam County become even more wary of their strange neighbors as things escalate. When going by there one morning, they are marching around with guns. When you are met with armed individuals who claim that they are not subject to your laws, armed conflict is usually instantaneous. The question becomes, how do you infiltrate a cult? It is clear that something sinister is happening at the compound, but with no witnesses willing to talk about it, authorities are left in a tough spot. Both the FBI and law enforcement in Georgia do not want to have a repeat of Waco. In 1993, in Waco, Texas, just 1 year before the investigation on the Nuwaubian Nation leader, Dwight York, began, a 51-day standoff between the FBI and a religious group called the Branch Davidians ended in a deadly fire, resulting in 76 deaths, including 25 children. What began as an attempt to serve a search and arrest warrant escalated into one of the most tragic events in U.S. history. The aftermath sparked outrage in the media, with witnesses and survivors criticizing the government's handling of the situation. Now faced with the same fear, authorities are deeply concerned about how to handle their investigation on York. For nearly a decade, they did everything to build a strong case against the leader. But what they really needed was a real victim statement, someone on the inside who knew what was going on to expose the truth. And that is when Niki, the girl who had just escaped, decides to come forward. He took advantage of our work, our bodies, our minds. He had us fooled. He does not get to have the last say in that. Finally, with the survivor on the record, authorities have enough evidence to make their move. On the morning of May 8, 2002, Sheriff Sills and an army of over 200 deputies, U.S. Marshals, and FBI tactical agents get ready to bring in Dwight York. The difficult part is that they need to prevent York from rallying his followers to violently resist upon entry. If this goes wrong, it could quickly turn deadly, and they know a lot of children are on the premises. Sheriff Sills comes up with a plan. The first step will be closely tracking Dwight York, patiently waiting for him to leave the compound before the raid. The FBI had him under surveillance on the ground and by air support. Hours pass. The authorities wait in silence in fear of what comes next. Finally, the gates of Tama reopen. They spot a sleek black car leaving. The FBI agents start following it, doing their best not to get spotted. Communication confirms that his vehicle had pulled into a parking lot of a grocery store. The SWAT team was there and the arrest teams. The job was to make sure they could identify him. FBI agents hold their breath waiting for the car door to open as they wait hidden in the parking lot, hoping Dwight York has been the man in the vehicle this whole time. One miscalculation could risk the entire operation. If it is not York, they cannot risk the leader discovering that they are coming for him while still protected at the compound. Then the car door swings open. A man exits from the back seat. The surveillance team confirms it. It is Dwight York walking out of the car. Now is the time to strike. The agents make their move just as planned. With meticulous coordination, they quickly move out of unmarked vehicles approaching York, who, surrounded by a swarm of armed agents, finally has nowhere left to run. The team makes an arrest. Now it is Sheriff Sills' turn to complete his mission. He swiftly leads a convoy with dozens of local and federal officers into the gates of Tamari, but not without caution. Hundreds of innocent children and their families live on the grounds. Despite anticipation of resistance and retaliation, they enter without force through the main gates. As the deputies swarmed in, a big perimeter was created. The raid was a show of force, involving hundreds of local and federal officers. After years of fear, secrecy, and abuse, Tamari finally comes to a quiet end. The operation is successful and without any violence. The thought was, you know what, we are going to prove this case. We are going to get some closure for so many victims. Now, with York in custody and the Nuwaubian compound disbanded, Putnam County law enforcement continues building their legal case against York with the FBI. For nearly 2 years, they gather more witnesses, expert testimonies, and countless pieces of evidence. York absolutely did not want to go to trial because all his secrets would come out. At the beginning of January 2004, Dwight York's trial begins. He faces charges for several counts of child abuse, rape, racketeering, conspiracy, and tax fraud. While York sits in the courtroom finally facing accountability for his horrific crimes, the survivors sit together hand in hand. Among the survivors is Niki. She looks at York. He is no longer the self-proclaimed god and prophet she once knew. To her, he just looks like a regular old man, his hair turning gray and his body appearing frail in an orange prison jumpsuit. She had not seen him in 3 years, and actually it was kind of liberating, because she felt like he cannot tell her anything. He cannot make her do anything. That was the first time of her getting her power back. Niki stands with her head high. Nervous but with strength, she walks toward the witness stand to testify against the man who once had so much power over her. One witness would lead to the next in terms of identifying victims. In the end, at least 40 victims were identified and interviewed. After 3 weeks of testimony, on January 23, 2004, Dwight York is found guilty on 11 of the 13 counts and sentenced to the maximum penalty. Among the litany of state and federal charges against him, York pleads guilty to 74 counts of child molestation, the interstate transportation of minors for criminal sexual activity, conspiracy, and racketeering. York is currently serving a 135-year federal prison sentence on lockdown for 23 hours a day. He has exhausted all of his appeals, and that is where he will remain. Justice had been served for these victims. What that sentence does too is assures these people that they can now walk with their head high, pursue their dreams. After York's conviction, Niki moves to South Florida with a new lease on life. There she pursues her JED and finds her passion as an artist with a mission to serve the community and empower others. In 2015, Niki starts an organization called What's Your Elephant?, which uses the arts as an avenue to challenge social norms. For the last 20 years, Niki has positively influenced her community. Dwight York called himself a leader, but Niki actually became one. He had us fooled. He never cared about us. He took advantage of our work, our bodies, our minds. Now that he is in prison, he is living how he forced us to live while he took advantage of us. He does not get to have the last say in that. Her strength to stand up for herself and for others has not gone unnoticed. In 2004, after testifying against York, she received the Louis C. Peters Memorial Service Award, the highest civilian humanitarian award in the U.S. Through her determination to turn her pain into purpose, Niki continues to work with underserved communities, supporting them to speak their truth and share their stories. Today, she stands as a true leader, proof that even in the darkest chapters, healing and purpose can emerge.